Good evening and welcome. Tonight we're going to be going over the history of Trinidad and Tobago. As you can see, they are two islands. They are in the Caribbean, in the very southern part of it. You can see right over here, this is Venezuela right here, and down here, that's how far south it is. It's basically, I suppose physically it's part of South America, but politically it's still part of North America. It's still considered part of the Caribbean. So let me show you about these islands. One of the biggest geographic features of the island of Trinidad is the Gulf of Paria. You can see right here. The capital city of Port of Spain sits along it. And all along here are gorgeous beaches. There's beaches all over Trinidad and Tobago, but these are the nice ones up here as well in the north. This, I think, is some sad bug that got slammed shut in my book one day. I don't know what that is. It's not a geographic feature. Just ignore that. And as you can see, there's a very long. It's very oddly shaped island. I don't know how to describe it. It seems almost too perfectly cut. The shape is very unique. It has a very interesting geographic layout too. This area all down here is mostly flat. There are some hilly and slightly mountainous areas. You can see the Trinity Hills are down here. And there's some mountainous areas up here. This is the Central Range, but the biggest are all up here. This area is called the Northern Range. You can see the highest point, El Cerro de Aripo, right here. And it's not like crazy mountains. I mean, it is the Caribbean, but it is definitely much more hilly and mountainous than it is in the rest of the island. It is a very jungly, very beautifully tropical island. Lots of trees and wildlife. There are lots of beautiful rivers and waterfalls all going through it. And even some swamps. You can see right here the Nariva swamp and even the Caroni swamp, the Caroni River. And actually one very interesting place on Trinidad is here in La Brea. There is an asphalt lake here. It is the La Brea Pitch Lake. It's the world's largest still active asphalt lake. And if that name is familiar, La Brea is an area in Los Angeles that also has an asphalt lake, but it's dried up. This is the only one that's still going. Very interesting geographic feature, an asphalt lake. Can you imagine? Very bizarre. But for the most part, when you think of Trinidad, think very tropical, lush, and very beautiful as well. Moving on up here to Tobago. Tobago is a lot more basically shaped. The name comes from the Spanish word for tobacco because it's shaped like a cigar. And Tobago would be the British mispronunciation of the Spanish word for tobacco. But Tobago has a much smaller population than Trinidad, definitely being a smaller island, and it is the majority of it is mountainous. You can see all of the big mountains up here. It's also much more forested, so these mountains are just covered in beautiful trees and cliffs and waterfalls, all the things you can imagine. It's much flatter down in this area. The largest city, Scarborough, is down there. There is a gorgeous coral reef right here in Bucco Bay. And there are a couple of smaller islands off of Trinidad and Tobago, but the largest of the small islands is Little Tobago right there. It is also a very gorgeous place, of course. And for the most part, that would be the geography of Trinidad and Tobago. Let me go over the history of it, and then I do have a book to flip through, but I am very closely zoomed in, so we will get to this book in a more zoomed out fashion after I go over history, so stay tuned for that. So, people have been living on Trinidad, at least, for a very long time. It's believed to be the earliest inhabited Caribbean island. If you know your Caribbean history from my channel or what have you, people came to the Caribbean islands via South America, so of course this was their first stop. The oldest, or I should say the earliest archaeological site on Trinidad comes from around 50,000 BCE, and the majority of the peoples who lived on Trinidad and Tobago were either Arawak or Carib. There's many different tribes within those. Those are just mainly the languages that were spoken and the cultures that were followed. But those were the majority. And for the Arawak and Carib people were very different. They scattered throughout the Caribbean. So various islands are populated by one or the other. This is one of the few cases where it was both. The Arawak people, compared to the Carib people, were more peaceful, from what I've known in my research, very and not democratic, but they had a very good government system. They had an appointed chieftain and a whole, how should I describe it, a way to pass that down that was formal and followed and all those kinds of things. The Carib, meanwhile, were warriors, and I mean, they will fight anyone, anytime, anywhere. They're down to fight. They're very violent people. And that probably saved them in the long run, if you know your history. But both people inhabited these islands in different parts, of course, because if anyone got near the Caribs, they would fight them. So anyway, flash forward to 1498, when some guy that you probably have never heard of, named Christopher Columbus, stopped on the island of Trinidad on his third voyage to the New World, and he named the island, well, it had a long name, of course, because the Spanish back then named everything with huge long names, but it was the island of the Trinity, Trinidad, and the name has stuck ever since. In the 1530s, the Spanish came very aggressively because, of course, Columbus claimed it for Spain, right? And they basically came in and told the natives, we're taking over whether you like it or not, and fought a war with them. And it was the Arawak people, so they were just what did we do? Okay. And they ended up negotiating a treaty, please stop fighting us, we didn't ask for this, But anyway, the Spanish came and took over, hence you can see the name Port of Spain. There was one little hiccup in this area when Sir Walter Raleigh came by in 1595. He was a wild fellow. He was a pirate, right? But he was also the favorite of Elizabeth I, so she just allowed him to do whatever he wanted as long as it was in the name of England and the crown. So he came, attacked the island, and hung out for a little bit, and then just left, and everything went back to normal. He was an interesting character. Meanwhile, Tobago's history, it wasn't really touched by the Spanish as much, at least at first. So many different peoples came. The Dutch tried to colonize the Coronians, who don't exist anymore. Basically, their country was what is now Latvia. They tried to claim the island. The French came by, tried to claim the island, so on. It traded hands back and forth many, many times. And that's, of course, because these islands were used for plantations. Of course, the climate's perfect for growing sugar. That was the big hot commodity in this area. So the island of Trinidad was made part of the Viceroyalty of New Spain. Hold on, my cat's snoring. Let me... Hey, honey, wake up. Thank you. A lot of Catholic missionaries came to the area to convert people, much to their discontent, and they definitely showed it at some points where they revolted. And of course, there were a lot of plantations. And when you have a lot of plantations, you need a lot of slaves. So many people were taken from Africa and brought to actually both of these islands. But the problem was that there were so many different, quote unquote, new places to set up a plantation and so on and so forth that Trinidad and definitely Tobago were vastly overlooked. They had very low populations. So Spain tried to incentivize people to move to Trinidad by offering land grants. And that didn't quite work at first until a couple of decades later, when the French started taking advantage of this French people from other islands in the Caribbean decided to hop on and get some cheap land and start plantations there. And then when the French Revolution happened, a lot of French people fled the islands they were on and came here to a safer, more stable island where it was very French friendly, and the population had a little boom. Lots of French people moving in. It became a majority French-speaking country, and of course all of their slaves came along too. So the population vastly grew on Trinidad, not so much on Tobago. So in 1797, the British did what the British do best. They came and invaded, took over. And from what I see, Spain sort of put up a fight, but not really. They're just like, whatevs. So Trinidad eventually became a crown colony and became a big plantation area. And it became a crown colony in 1802, I should say. And then British people started coming in, along with like Irish and Germans and people from those corners of Europe. And then in 1833, slavery was abolished in the British Empire. But, it was more a matter of what are these plantation owners going to do? They suddenly don't have any labor at all. So they set up a program called an apprenticeship, where the former slaves would still work as slaves, but would get paid, and it would last for 5 years. And so in 1838, the apprenticeship ended, right? So the point was that they could have some land and then have skills, I guess. And the land and skills they got were pretty rotten. They were pretty much sent to live in poverty in a way, so that upset a lot of people. And then to replace that lost labor, because of course they're not going to want to keep working on these plantations where they lived as slaves, that's pretty upsetting. Britain sent in indentured servants from India. And they were also incentivized that if they came from India to work for a good, I think at first it was 10 years and they shortened it to 5, that they could get land and settle on the island. And some Indians took up that offer. Some of them just went back home. There were lots of other places in the British Empire where more Indian people were more inclined to stay. Trinidad was not really one of them, but there's still, even to this day, a very large Indian population left over from that time. But like I said, compared to some of their other colonies, they didn't get nearly as many Indian indentured servants coming by, which is why they lowered the working year here and just try to sweeten the deal as much as possible. Meanwhile, over on Tobago, they weren't having any kind of population boom. The plantations were kind of sinking, and that's because, once the slaves were freed and their apprenticeship was over, they really couldn't get anyone to work the plantations. So these former slaves were still working there, much to their chagrin. They still lived under horrible conditions. They lived in poverty, and there was no end in sight. At least in Trinidad, lots of people were convinced to move there, but not so much here. So there was a very large, violent movement in 1876. Very violent movement at one of the plantations. And Britain was very upset by this. They had to send in soldiers to stop it. And they decided to absorb Tobago as an official crown colony so that it could get more attention that it desperately needed. And because the economy in Trinidad started to do really well in this time, they decided to attach it. And that is why we have Trinidad and Tobago. Forever joined, apparently, as one country. And that was in 1889. Things would slowly but surely improve, but not nearly fast enough for the people here. There was a very big, violent protest in the 1910s over water rates, to the point where they burned down like the main, it's called the Red House, like the main, like basically Parliament building. And the 1920s, there were also not violent, but definitely big protests, mainly over like the management of the islands. Also, during the 1920s, when most of the world started, having a good time economically, Trinidad and Tobago entered a depression. Their economy wasn't doing so well. There was a huge decrease in sugar prices, and that was their main export still to that time. And then, of course, the 1930s came, and the depression became even worse. So people were very, very upset. There's a lot of unrest, and a lot of political parties formed during this time, many of which still exist today, to support not just like workers' rights, but like the lower class, a party just for the Indians, a party just for the blacks, so on and so forth, looking out for each other's interests. And then in the 1950s, the government, I suppose, decided to switch the main export to petroleum. So as you can see here, there are lots of oil deposits all throughout this area, same in this part of Venezuela. There's just something about this part of the Caribbean where there's just a lot of oil to be found. So Trinidad started vastly pumping oil and exporting petroleum, and that brought a nice big boom, which when after World War II, Britain was focusing on decolonization of all their colonies. So Trinidad and Tobago were like, well, we are making lots of money now. Why don't we just go independent? And that they did on August 31st, 1962. They're still a part of the Commonwealth, still are to this day. And in 1976, they became a republic within the Commonwealth. And, that's still how it is today. The 1960s brought a very large Black Power movement inspired by the Civil Rights Movement in the United States. And then unrest happened once again in the 1990s when oil prices fell. And there was even an attempted coup that lasted, jiggling the camera, that lasted for 6 days, where they held the president hostage. They held like the one TV station on the island hostage. But they negotiated their way out of it and got them arrested, and everything was fine. Politically, things have been fairly stable. There was a bit of corruption in, like the 2010s, I want to say. 2003 saw a big oil boom once again. And the main exports were focused mostly on petrochemicals and natural gas, things like that. And yeah, the last big political news was their last election in 2020. Their Prime Minister, Keith Rowley, was reelected. And for the most part, things have been pretty stable economically. So let me change the angle and we'll flip through this book and I'll show you some beautiful pictures. And we're going to cut there, zoom this out, and let me flip to a page on the Caribbean. Ouch, okay. Okay, that works for me. There's my Red Bull. Okay. Move this out the way. Okay. Jeez. Okay, I think I've zoomed out enough to show you this book. Let's Let's check it out. Trinidad and Tobago. Look at the little, oh, so cute. Little turtle. One of the beautiful beaches on these islands. Carnival is, of course, probably one of the biggest holiday festival celebrations on the island. Shopping at the local market. And, you know, here's what I mean by just being beautifully lush. That even though we have the city here, there's still all this wonderful green around. Very, very beautiful. Here's a good close map of Trinidad and Tobago. And here is Pitch Lake. Ugh, don't get stuck in that. Yucky. We have the national flower. It's the Chiconia flower, also known as the wild poinsettia, even though it's not a poinsettia flower. A beautiful ibis, scarlet ibis in the Caroni Swamp. Maracas Bay Beach, isn't that gorgeous? Oh, I'd love to go swimming in a warm tropical beach right now. This is at Charlottesville in Tobago. It's, I think, probably like the second largest city in Tobago. Oh no, never mind, it's Roxborough. But yeah, this is like one of the famous historical places in Trinidad and Tobago. This is on Tobago. It's a fort that was built by the Spanish that's still hanging around. Beautiful rock art from one of the indigenous peoples. This is Sir Thomas Picton. He was the first British governor of the island of Trinidad, and he was not a good guy. He was like deposed because I found out that he was torturing people. I think it talks about it over here. One of the people he tortured was a 14-year-old girl. So yeah, he got kicked out. This is the Red House, the seat of government. That's a good way of putting it. A sugar plantation in the 1930s. This is the first Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, Dr. Eric Williams. He's considered like the father of Trinidad and Tobago. And this is the current Prime Minister, Dr. Keith Christopher Rowley. Another picture of the Red House. And here's the flag. Let's take a closer look at it. It says the three colors included in Trinidad and Tobago's national flag are white, black, and red. Each color symbolizes a different aspect of the nation's history, character, and values. Red symbolizes the temperament of the country, its vitality, warmth, and courage. Black represents strength, unity, and the wealth of the country and its oil reserves. White represents purity and equality. The three colors also represent earth with black, water with white, and fire with red, the three basic elements of life. The majority of the flag is red, with three diagonal bands running from the top left corner to the bottom right corner. These bands consist of one large black band in the middle and two thinner white bands to the left and right. The national flag of Trinidad and Tobago was adopted in 1962 when the nation gained its independence from the British Empire. And if you like these flag parts as much as I do, I just got a whole book of flags, so there'll be a whole video of this soon. This is another Prime Minister, Patrick Manning, and another Prime Minister, Kamala Persad Bissar, and she was the first and so far only female Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago. This is Badass. I didn't include him or any of the other like early founders of the political parties because I'm afraid of mispronouncing his name. Badass Mirage, who founded the People's Democratic Party. Oh, here's an oil well. Check it out. On the page about economy, right? Of course. So here they are drilling from the asphalt lake. This is in 1890. They're shoveling it out. Here is their currency, the dollar. Here are some turtles coming to the beach to lay their eggs. Very awesome. And here's another old photo, and they've got cocoa beans. And here's a ship carrying out a bunch of exports. Oh, what a pretty bird. It says, this is the Trinidad and Tobago. Isn't that cute? Look at that beautiful tail, too. The oil drills in the Gulf. And apparently traffic is a problem in the highlands. This is in Port of Spain. I guess the majority of people there own cars. The Trinidad piping wine. Another very pretty bird. I like that. Like its head looks like a little skull. A sweet little manatee swimming around. And great egrets, it says, in the Caroni Swamp Bird Sanctuary. And there's little Tobago off of Tobago's coast. We've got some kind of festival going on here. Looks very exciting. And here are some of the indigenous people, the Santa Rosa Carib community. And what did I tell you? It was very wise of the Caribs to be incredibly violent because their culture, in a sense, still exists today. They've managed to preserve themselves. And there has been a bit of a refugee issue from Venezuela. Many Venezuelans fled to Trinidad and Tobago, where it's been kind of like a hot button issue. Because that guy looks like he's a Rasta. Getting some food. It's Indian street food. It sounds delicious. I'm buying some eggs at the market. And this is Keith Rowley with some high school students. This is a ferry. It says it goes between Port of Spain and Scarborough. And an Indian wedding. They're so colorful. So lively too. Here's an old photograph from a Catholic church in Port of Spain. Here is a Hindu temple, also in Port of Spain. What's over here? Oh, a pot for a ritual for Ocean, which is a goddess worshipped in a very traditional African, Yoruban belief, I should say, from Africa, mainly from Nigeria. And this is a Baptist on Shouter Baptist Liberation Day. The Baptist church was banned for quite a couple of years. I think it says over here between 1917 and 1951 for being like too loud and obnoxious because they obviously shout. But then it was unbanned. Now they have a holiday celebrating that. Here is Haile Selassie the First, the ruler of Ethiopia, who Rastafarians believe was the Messiah, and they worship him to this day. It's like one of the main focuses of the religion. Here's a girl celebrating Diwali, the Festival of Lights, and a very lovely mosque. I like the minaret. It looks like a lighthouse. What the language is spoken, it's mainly English, but they have their own dialect, like a mishmash of like mainly like French, kind of like a Creole language in a way. Cute kid. Here's a little wild, but that's okay. Some newspapers. Looks like it's mainly about Hugo Chavez. A steel drum band. So music is, of course, a huge part of culture here. Calypso music was invented in Trinidad and Tobago. This guy, his name's Bunji Garland, I believe. And he is a soca artist, which is, I believe, a type of calypso. Here is a very famous calypso performer. Her name's Calypso Rose. Here's a writer, Derek Walcott, who wrote most of his books while in Trinidad. And it wasn't just calypso music that was invented here. The limbo was invented here as well. Look how intense that is. Wow. It says her name is Shamika Charles. Limboing under the fire. That's intense. And here is the National Museum in Port of Spain. Very lovely building. Some guys hanging out. Wayne O'Connor Jr., who won the Junior Calypso Monarch competition. Excellent. People enjoying a big, loud concert. This is Hasley Crawford, a famous Olympian track and field star, and the Trinidad and Tobago national soccer team. And this building is one of the Magnificent Seven, one of the 7 very old colonial style houses that still exist today. Carnival. Very exciting festival. This is a picture from the Jose Festival. It's a Muslim festival practiced on Trinidad and Tobago. Another picture from a really lively looking Diwali celebration. Food, this is kalaloo. Looks like there's lots of onions in it. And some greens. Making some roti bread. Because of course Indian food would be a big part if there's a big Indian community. And mabi, what is it? Some kind of drink. It looks like it's made from tree bark. Let's see. Yeah, it's made from flower. Oh no, it's made from the bark of the mabi tree. Very interesting. Some coconut jelly. Using coconut meat gelatin, coconut milk, and cow's milk. Interesting. I guess it's like jello, it says. That's very interesting. And then, of course, seafood is a big part of the diet. My kind of food. This looks really good. Some chicken. And a kind of like cassava cake, it looks like. Then one last little map of Trinidad and Tobago. You can really see the mountain areas here, as opposed to the more flatter forested areas. And that's going to be it for tonight. Thank you so much for watching. I do hope that you found this video relaxing and educational. And I hope that you have a very good